Maybe other than taxes, metadata has to be the least sexiest part of this job. From wrangling keywords and mood terms across spreadsheets and PDFs and submission forms, it could be really soul-sucking at times, and for some reason, raw data entry doesn't always resonate with us creative types. But that having been said, metadata can also be the most important part of the life of a queue, because before an editor or a supervisor ever clicks on your track to hear it, they're going to read a title, description, or a keyword in a library catalog search. So on today's show, I want to go over the most common points of metadata found in most libraries and give you some of my strategies that could mean the difference between getting placed or getting passed over. Plus, we listen through the latest submission in my year of taxi, follow up on any returns or forwards, and I provide feedback on a queue written by a member of the 52 Queues community on this week's episode of the 52 Queues podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Queues podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. Plus, in my Year of Taxi update, we're going to check in on any returns or forwards and take a listen to this week's submission, which is a contemporary hip-hop queue. And then a little bit later on, I'm going to give my thoughts on a neutral tasking queue written by 52 Queues community member Gun-Britt Sundstedt. So you definitely want to stick around for that. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad you found me. However you found me, I know you have a ton of options out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go. I just want to thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I also want to give a special word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Queues who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything we do here going. We are 100% community supported, so you're not going to hear ads for mattresses or meal plans. But if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Queues and also unlock extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the link in the description or stick around, because we're going to be talking about that a little bit later in today's episode. So let's check in on my Year of Taxi. And I gotta say, I haven't heard back from last week's epic orchestral submission. So I can't forward that. I can't return that. That having been said, I did get a little bit of feedback from some folks that I actually incorporated. It's the community at work, putting it out there. Somebody, a few folks gave some really good notes, and you're never too far along, you're never too pro, you've never accomplished so much that you can't benefit from hearing from other folks. So I appreciate you folks who gave your ideas and gave your thoughts. And because it was early enough, I was able to actually submit that and make some tweaks and then make the final submission. But this week I turned in a brief for a contemporary hip-hop queue, and they were looking for contemporary rap hip-hop instrumental tracks needed by a music licensing company. The company is looking for mid to up-tempo instrumental tracks that could be heard on the following playlists, and no vocals, so instrumentals only. And important note here from the brief listing that the company is not interested in composers that turn in 1 or 2 tracks every couple of months. They want composers that they can work closely with, the kind that would be able to deliver an album's worth of production music within a few weeks of signing with the company. It's a great opportunity to build an ongoing relationship. So yeah, I think this is fantastic. And while I definitely have opportunities right now to submit, urban contemporary type hip hop cues, if you will, I think I'm always looking for new relationships. So they're looking for top-notch hip hop instrumental tracks with innovative beats, catchy motifs, and tons of mainstream appeal that could work for sync placements. Your submission should have engaging arrangements with plenty of dynamics and interest that could inspire fresh top lines to be written to them, as well as current sounding hip hop instrumentation that falls in the general ballpark of the references. Polished production and high-quality sounds and samples are needed as well, since the company is interested in instrumentals that sound more like finished records rather than stock music library tracks. And so just right out of the gate, I knew I was going to lean into more hip-hop form than production music form. The production music form where you kind of build into a breakdown and then build. And because they were looking for 2 to 4 minutes, you can kind of breathe a little bit. And so hip hop form tends to be a little more verse, chorus, or kind of intro, chorus, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, right? That type of form, as opposed to A, B, A, where the B is really just part of your A layers with sounds removed or with energy removed, which is kind of what the epic cue was from last week. So I felt like I could lean into more of a commercially released form, and you'll be able to hear that here in a second. And then finally, they said that they're looking for composers who know how to create trap-style beats, but they should also have knowledge in other hip-hop subgenres. And I did notice that some of the references leaned more into drill, and so drill is a kind of a subset of trap with 808s and clicky stutter hats, but the tempos are vary just a little bit. Trap is a broader type of a genre or subgenre, whereas drill is a little bit more like UK drill or New York drill or whatever. And so this the cue that I wrote for this search is Game Time Decision. So let's take a listen to it. So that was Game Time Decision. And yeah, that hook was a lot of Serato sample going on there. And again, that the form of this is much more like a typical commercially released record with the starts and the stops and the dropouts and the verse, chorus. And what do you do with the hook? The hook needs to be pretty prevalent, but drop it down an octave and that kind of thing. So what do you think? Do you think this is a forward? Do you think that this is a return? Let me know in the comments below. I think it's going to be a forward if I get dinged for anything. It's going to be that the melody is maybe too repetitive, but then again, I mean, that's hip hop, right? That's hip hop. So you have to work really hard to make it sound like the arc of the melody is developing without actually doing all of the things, that you learn in composition class as far as development and, harmonic shenanigans and all of that stuff. So we'll see. We'll see if they dig it. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. So metadata. What is it? Why should we care? Well, before we get started, let me actually talk about what it's not. We're not talking about the tags that live like in an MP3 file itself. That's not what we're talking about. ID3 tags, I think they're called, those are important, and that's for a whole other topic, but we're talking about the data, the information, the metadata that lives in library catalogs that are associated with the cues that we submit. And unfortunately, the collection method is wildly inconsistent. Some libraries have you fill out a PDF form. Some libraries have you fill out spreadsheets. Some libraries, I've even taken send them via email. Some libraries have very sophisticated ingestion forms that you're able to upload your cue, and it will check the file name to make sure that the proper cut down, alt mixer stem information is proper with, again, really sophisticated drop downs, and you can pick from a word cloud of moods and emotions, and that's all well and good. But I've done all of those things. But we're talking about information that lives in the catalog, not necessarily in the file itself. So that having been said, metadata, what is it? Why should we care? Well, the biggest takeaway for this is that good metadata helps us get our cues discovered, helps us get our cues found. Because an editor or a music supervisor, as they are collecting music for whatever project they're working on, they're entering in keywords and they're doing, maybe this sounds like this certain artist, or it has this certain harmonic quality to it, or this emotion, or this instrumentation, this specific instrumentation. So it behooves us to write good tags. And I have found that it is more often than not our responsibility as the composers, and arguably we have the more vested interest into making sure that we have good metadata associated with our cues. And it's often our responsibility, because nobody's going to quite care enough about your cue more than you. So even if you have a library which might do some metadata, even though the vast majority of mine I have to submit myself, but even if they do, then I think it behooves you to write your own tags. Because this is essentially search engine optimization by this point. Search engines, and so we want to write tags, keywords, descriptions that help our cues get discovered, that are accurate, and that are saying the most about the cue without exaggerating, obviously, but helping our cues get discovered. Now, I mentioned in the intro that this is the least fun part. It's not my favorite thing, especially because I often put it off and I have to wait until a bunch of cues are due. Like I'll do a whole album and then I'll just get them all approved, and then I'll sit down and write them all at once. And I think that's the least effective way to do it. I would recommend trying to keep up with the tags as you're writing them and as you're submitting them. Maybe even just add it into the notes section of whatever DAW you're using. I know Logic has a little notepad file. I think Cubase has a notes section as well. Just add it there. Add it to the template. Add everything you need to know about the cue. Add it into the template itself. And this is something that I'm going to start doing because I am admittedly terrible at this. I'm terrible. So this is me telling Dave, get better at writing these tags as you go. Your future self will thank you. And before we go any further, I do want to say, I mean, look at these slides. These slides are nice. This was taken from a much longer, like an hour and a half long workshop that is available now to the friends and family subscribers of 52Qs. It was given a few months ago, but the archive is up there along with some downloads, and we go much deeper, and there are some other resources for those subscribers. Just go into workshops and click on past events, and there you have it. And this is also part of what I took and taught at the Road Rally last fall. I did a workshop on metadata, and these slides are from there. So let's talk about the common tags, the most common tags you're going to find in most libraries. This isn't an exhaustive list, but this is just the list that I've seen show up across the most libraries. And they're into essentially 5 different types of categories. One are descriptors, others emotions. And so we're talking about like title, genre, description. Those are the descriptors. And then your emotion, which is going to be your mood and your energy. High energy, low energy, mood. Is it suspenseful? Is it dramedy? Is it whatever? Keywords is kind of a catch-all bucket that you can put other emphasis words on. And then we have musical information. This is going to be like the instrumentation, the key, the tempo, BPM, and duration. This is just data. There's not much creative that you have to do there. And then finally, file info. This would be what other composers does your cue sound like? What scene could it be played? If it sounds like it could be placed in a Real Housewives cue, then you might want to say it sounds like a Real Housewives cue. Or if it sounds like Thomas Newman, guilty as charged, then you would put Thomas Newman there in the sounds like. And then the version and then the file name. And I'm going to be going into each one of these and giving you some ideas. But I will say that when I write my tags, I tend to work backwards. And what I mean by that is I start with the objective data that takes the least amount of creative energy. It doesn't really take a lot of thought, a lot of creative output, because usually when I'm doing these, I'm empty. I'm empty because I'm doing a lot of them at once, Dave, or I've just done writing. And so what I'll do is I'll actually start with like the instrumentation and the key. That's just raw data. What is the key of the cue? What's the tempo? Is it kind of up tempo? Is it down tempo? Is it fast? Is it aggressive? What's the actual BPM? Like the objective data that takes zero creative effort, and fill all of those in. And then I work my way backwards to where I'm ending with the description last. Because I have found that by the time you fill out everything else, the description seems to come a little bit easier. But if you just sit down and write a title and then write a description, then you have, 13 other empty fields, and this feels like you've not made any progress at all. And so I find it really beneficial to start with the empirical data and then work backwards. All right, so let's unpack each of these. First of all, the title. The title is arguably the most important aspect. It's kind of a tie between the title and the description, but before they click on it to play it, they're going to read a title. And the title can do so much to manage the expectations of what the supervisor or editor, what they're about to hear. For example, from a couple of weeks ago, the dramedy cue that I wrote that got returned had slide whistle, which sounded kind of theremin-y, right? I didn't hear it when I wrote it, but I totally hear it now, and I understand that theremin equals Halloween. So if I were to work Halloween, some sort of Halloween idea into the title, then before that theremin ever makes an appearance in the cue, the music supervisor's kind of listening for something. And so now the theremin isn't some surprise element which bends it out of what they thought it would be. Now it's square in the middle of their expectations. And so the title can do so much heavy lifting before they ever play the cue itself. It manages expectations. It prepares them to hear what they're about to hear. A good title does that. And I do have some tips for some good titles. My tips, keep it short, around 2 to 5 words. No more than that, 2 to 5 words. Don't get too deep into it. I try to avoid definite articles like the, and an, just because titles tend to be sorted alphabetically. And even though, like if it was let's see, a title would be like the epic fail, right? It wouldn't be epic fail, comma, the. It would just show up as the. And so you are just one of a laundry list of titles with the word the first, or and. So I try to avoid definite articles, but keep it short, 2 to 5 words. Anything longer than that, then you run the risk of it not fitting in the cell or running over. And so, yeah, this is not a hard, fast rule, just like the definite article rule isn't a hard, fast rule. It's just my tip. Also, convey the emotion, but don't use specific mood words. If it's a tension cue, don't write the word tension in the title itself. You want to use something that evokes the emotion, right? Or the type of scene or something like that. So it could be coroner's conjecture, right? It could be solving the riddles. It could be putting the pieces together, if that were like a tension cue. If it was a dramedy cue, it might be like funky chonkers. I wrote a hip-hop dramedy cue called There's a Mouse in the Hizzle. The hip-hop cue we listened to earlier, game time decision, right? That implies a type of usage. So convey the emotion, but don't use specific emotion words. Also, don't use artist names, brands, or trademarks. And even if you're not sure if it's a trademark, just steer clear. I don't think you're not going to be in any legal jeopardy, but that word is going to show up in cue sheets. It's going to show up, and you just avoid it. And if it's a word that isn't necessary, like the word Superman, I don't think, or superhero, I don't think Superman's actually trademarked. I don't believe, but just try to avoid it. Just like with lyrics in production music tracks, you don't want to, say proper names, artist names, brands, trademarks, just avoid those. And so I also find that clever wordplay, alliterations, puns, and turns of phrases tend to get noticed. One of my favorite titles is, let's see, I wrote a Middle Eastern trailer cue called Honor Among Thebes, right? So that's a pun because Thebes is a city in Egypt. Honor among thieves is a phrase, honor among Thebes. Another one that I wrote that I really, really like was Stalker Texas Strangler. That was another fun one I wrote. I already mentioned Funky Chonkers. I wrote a kind of a fantasy dramedy cue called Some Enchanted Sneaking, right? I mentioned Coroner's Conjecture. I wrote a cue that got a lot of love called Red Zone Rundown, like that iambic pentameter. It flows together, alliteration, puns. And if you really want to see some fantastic puns, look up Extreme Music. Their catalog is full of fantastic titles. And also Michael Giacchino, the composer, is the king of really, really great titles. So wordplay, puns, turns of phrases, those tend to get noticed. And some other titles, Wiggity Whack Job was one that I wrote. Trying to think of some of the other ones. The In Thickness and in Health, right? And it was another hip hop dramedy cue. I like writing dramedy titles are fun to write. So that's the title. Those are my suggestions for writing effective titles. So next up, the description. It's as important, if not more important. I actually saw on a Facebook post from a music supervisor who said, or it might have been a library owner, who said that the description is sometimes more important than the title because the title might catch their eye, but the description is where they decide to listen. Because they say, ooh, I think I want to check out what that cue is about. And before they hit play, they'll read a description. So is it more important than title? Maybe. Some things to keep in mind with the description. First of all, narrative prose, complete sentences. This isn't a word cloud. It's not just a bunch of keywords all strung together. Make complete sentences. Make it make sense. And so my formula for a good description is start with an emotion plus an energy plus what genre it is, include some instrumentation, and then a possible usage. That's my formula that I use for so many of my descriptions. So for example, the cue that I played earlier, game time decision. Let's do this live in the So I would say it is a determined, so there's my emotion, a determined mid-tempo contemporary hip-hop cue. So determined emotion, mid-tempo energy level, genre, contemporary hip-hop cue with deep synth 808s. I'm losing it here. A determined mid-tempo contemporary hip-hop. I should have thought about this ahead of time. Contemporary hip-hop cue with synth or deep synth 808s, trap hats, and crisp backbeats, along with sampled flutes, perfect for game graphics. There's my description. So yeah, an emotion, an energy, plus the genre, include some instrumentation. Don't make it the exhaustive list because we're gonna list the instrumentation a little bit later. But the primary instrumentation, usually that supports the genre, plus a potential usage. That's how I write 95% of my descriptions. So there you go. You can have at it. So next up, we have our genre. Is it a style or a mood? Well, it's super important to know the difference here. And where I see folks get into a little bit of trouble here is conflating like genre and mood, because tension is a mood. That's an emotion, not necessarily a genre. So you can have hip hop tension, but hip hop is the genre. Tension is the mood or emotion. And so some folks get, and I see students all the time get tripped up on this. So if you needed to describe the genre of a tension cue, it's probably going to be soundtrack or orchestral. That would be the genre there. But usually soundtrack or instrumental could also be a genre, but it's not a mood. So keep to larger primary musical genres. Don't get too specific here, and don't use a mood when you should be using the genre. Because this is the large. So if it's trap, that's fine, write hip hop. If it's like death metal, then write metal. Or even if you want to go further up the chain, write rock. But I think metal is big enough to kind of be its own thing. Right? And also don't use obscure genres that not everyone and not the general public is going to know about. So I mentioned drill earlier. I know drill is kind of an up-and-coming subgenre of trap that's becoming kind of its own thing. I would be surprised if it doesn't show up like in the splice genre drop down. I'm sure drill's going to show up there soon. And hip-hop and EDM, notorious for typically location, like geographical-based subgenres, but don't use obscure genres. If it's a drill cue, don't write trap, just write hip-hop. And then you can use other spots, whether it's keywords or some libraries actually will let you write in the subgenre. They have genre and subgenre. Use those if available. Otherwise, elaborate in keywords. But libraries or editors, when they're looking for genres, they're going to think, okay, I have a show and, hip hop is in the fabric of the show. So I'm going to write hip hop. And so I need different moods, emotion, instrumentation, tempos, and everything in a certain genre. So if you wrote a hip hop tension cue, you would want to write hip hop for the genre and tension for the mood. You wouldn't write tension as the genre. Now, that having been said, I do know of one library who does put tension in their own genre because they're kind of They're mixing this up just a little bit, and just like dramedy is its own genre, it's its genre of production music. But for me, I stick to a standard searchable Spotify, Apple Music type musical genre. To my knowledge, Spotify doesn't have a tension music genre. And that's what we should be sticking to here. So that's my note about genre. Next up, we have the mood and energy, the emotional impact of the cue. So we're starting to drill down a little bit, and each one of these elements, whether it's the description, the title, the genre, it creates a data point that helps your cue to be found amongst all of the thousands of cues that are out there. And so when you're writing your mood, you want to be specific, and you want to write an emotional term that describes the vibe, the emotion, the tone of the cue. And I would recommend writing 2 or 3 terms so that an editor could triangulate the mood. What do I mean by that? All right, so it's a tension cue. All right, is it an ominous tension cue, or is it an investigative tension cue? Is it an intrigue tension cue? Is it a neutral tension cue? Is it a tasking tension cue? So if I have something that is an ominous, dark, distorted tension cue, I would write mood, would write tension, ominous, and then probably dark or distorted, which could be different from a dark, ominous, percolating tension cue, which has more movement. Distorted implies like just angry. Rah. Listening to a Game Time Decision from earlier. It's obviously hip hop. I wouldn't write tension. I would write a mood. I would write determined, which I referenced, right? I would write determined. I would write serious. And I would write, let's see, what other mood would I write for that? Maybe swagger, or determined, swagger, and maybe serious. Maybe a little bit of epic because it's got the tubular bells in it. But I would, yeah, I think serious. That's probably what I would use for the mood and energy on that. I would need to listen to it a few more times. I mean, I wrote it, but I would want to listen to it with fresh ears. But use 2 to 3 terms to triangulate the mood so that when the editor writes in multiple keywords, yours will come up. And so what order do you write those? Well, start with the broadest mood and then get more specific. You'd be more specific. Now, as far as energy level, this is a little bit different. It's different than tempo. It's different than BPM. Energy typically falls down to one of 4 very specific terms. And this is something that I've seen across multiple libraries where you're using specifically either low, medium, high, or building energy. Low, medium, high, or building. And they typically want just one of those terms. So you wouldn't write mid. And low is obviously, it's not tempo, it's the energy level. So an ominous drone tension cue would be low energy. The Game Time Decision, that would be medium energy. You could have like the epic orchestral hip hop cue, that would be high energy, even though it's not very fast. I think it was like 85, 90 beats per minute or something like that. It's not very fast because energy is just about the energetic level of the cue itself, not necessarily the speed of the cue. And then building would be a cue that crosses those energy levels. They might start low and then high. That would be building. So if you had a cue that started ominous, low, and then ended high, then you would write building on that. So that's mood and energy. Next up, we have our keywords. This is your catch-all bucket. This is where you can either reinforce words that you want to make sure get get really, really put into the search engine, or words that you don't have a spot for otherwise. It could be additional moods, featured instruments, specific subgenres, something that you really want to reiterate, you want to emphasize in your search. Because if you put like determined 2 or 3 times within reason, once in the mood, once in the keywords, or if you have a featured instrument that's like maybe steel drum, or maybe slide whistle, or theremin. For that cue, the Waltz of Shame that I would retitle, to something Halloween-y, then I would put theremin in the keyword for sure, so that it is emphasized and reiterated. And this is where, if you don't have an area to write the subgenre, this is where you would put it there. And then you want to separate those by commas. Right? Usually no spaces, but keep those separated by commas. That's your catch-all bucket, just in case you don't have a spot for something elsewhere or you want to reiterate something. Then we get into the file, the musical information. These are all the musical details about the cue itself. The instrumentation. Primary instruments, don't get too specific. If it's drums, you don't have to write like kick, bass, snare. Just write drums. If it's acoustic drums, then write acoustic drums, or just drum set. If it's epic drums, then you could write big epic drums, or cinematic drums work really, really well for that. Electronic drums, trap drums, hip hop drums, strings, you could be specific there. If it's super sweeping legato strings, then you might write sustained strings. If it's really staccato strings, you might write staccato strings, but you don't have to put like violin, viola, don't do that, just strings. Same with like synth, if it's pulses, bass pulses, those types of things. Specific featured instruments, but you don't have to get overly specific. And then introduce the key of the cue, talk about the key. This is the primary key, the key that the cue starts in, the tonic of the key. Ideally, this would be also the key that the cue ends in. Whatever that primary key is, if it's major or minor, you would indicate it that way. Usually, uppercase letters indicate major, uppercase letters with minor, like C minor or C little m, that would indicate the minor key. But just single letter, uppercase, that indicates the major key. I know in music school, lowercase letters indicated minor. I have found that that's not been really common there, and so I know the music student in me wants to write G, a little g for G minor, but you would put G and then minor. Treat it more like a chord symbol than you would, analysis that you would find in music theory class or whatever. And then the tempo, the general tempo of the cue, fast, quick, slow, plodding, right? You could like allegro or andante or moderate or moderately slow, medium slow. This is kind of related to energy, but it's not like you could have something like the epic orchestral hip hop cue from last week wouldn't be fast. It would be, the energy level would be high, but the tempo would be maybe mid up tempo. It wouldn't be up tempo. It would be medium up tempo, which is different from the BPM, which is the clinical number that you would give to the cue. The primary BPM, use whole numbers, don't, use decimal numbers. And there's something to be said about like hip hop cues written in halftime. I've seen it both ways. I've seen where like trap cues are usually programmed at like 140 or 150, but that's not the pulse. The pulse is more like 70 or 75. That's what it feels considering where the snare drum hits. But I've actually seen it kind of both ways, where it would be written as 140. I know in Splice, especially, that's how they're lined up for sample, sample packs and that kind of stuff. But I would tend to write something, if it's mid tempo, I wouldn't put the BPM at 150 necessarily, because that implies, that fast. So just a note there. And if you have any questions, then ask your library. They can definitely help you out with that. And then the duration, just the numbers in whole numbers, usually number, colon, number. Don't write 2 MIN, just write 02:00 or 2:00. or 1:30. Don't write 90 seconds. Don't write that. I keep hitting the wrong button here. Sorry, folks. Don't write 90 seconds. Just write 1:30. All right, next we have the file info. Now we're really getting into the details. One is, what does it sound like? This could be an artist, this could be a film, this could be a TV show. And don't use spammy words here. If you write Danny Elfman, or if you write, Taylor Swift, you write, Mike Wilmay, is that the name of the producer? Mike Will is the name of the producer, and his audio tag is Mike Wilmade. Anyway, that's not what this is about. My point is, make sure it actually does. Because the last thing you want to do is to put like Cardi B as sounds like, just because a lot of producers or a lot of editors are looking for this cue, and they listen to your cue and they're like, this sounds nothing like Cardi B. Or you write John Williams and it doesn't sound like John Williams. If you can't pull off John Williams, don't put John Williams here. But an artist, film, or TV show, I tend to stick to artist. Next, the version number. The revision, is it a specific mix? Is it a specific stem or a specific cut down? And then finally, the file name. So you're going to use the cue title, avoid punctuation. Usually underscores are best, but do include the file type extension like .wav, .mp, you wouldn't put .mp3 or .af or .wav or whatever. And different libraries do have different specs for their file information. So be sure to pay close attention to it. Some libraries won't be happy with you if you send them something with spaces. Some libraries are okay with that. Just check for sure. And so that is all of the metadata that I have found across the vast majority of libraries. So those are all the tags: descriptors, title, description, genre, emotion, mood, energy, keywords, musical information like instrumentation, key, tempo, BPM, duration, and then finally file information like sounds like, version, and file name. Different libraries vary. They're going to ask different things, and they're going to ask you to give it to them in different ways. At the end of the day, just roll with whatever they're asking, because remember, the idea is to help your music get found. So the better your tags are, the more descriptive your metadata is, the better chance you have of getting found. It's like finding a needle in a stack of needles, and good metadata helps that along. But what about you? Any experience with metadata? Have you had any libraries ask for certain things that you're like, wow, why are you asking for that? Like I said, the only one that really isn't in this list is subgenre. I have seen that show up a couple of times in some of my libraries. But if you've got some idea or some thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comments below. And so that's going to do it. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to hear from Mrs. 52Qs, who's going to tell us all about the community and how you can join, and how you could also get access to this full hour-and-a-half workshop where I dig even deeper and show examples, and we work through some things like descriptions and titles. So if you want to join that and subscribe, then stick around, because Shannon's going to talk about that. But when we return, we are going to check out a neutral tasking queue written by 52Q's community member, Gun-Britt Sundstedt.
Hey y'all, I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52Q's podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52Q's isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52Q's community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions, which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52qs.com and sign up today. And while you're there, check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52qs.com.
All right, that was Lost Tooth by Gun-Britt Sundstedt. Thank you so much for sending this along. This was sent along during our week 7 weekly feedback thread. And she said, after the lesson on neutral tasking, I wonder if this could be the beginning of such an album, or if I haven't really understood, if I continue this line and make about 10 songs in the same style, vibration, feeling, key, and progression. And I wanted to feature this cue, first of all, because I love the fact how you're just diving in, and you've come to the live streams and you've started looking at the workshops and everything. And I just wanted to just really encourage you and congratulate you on your bravery, just going for it. So really, really, really well done. Lots to really like about what's going on with this cue. I don't think we need this little intro, this little bit right in here. I think we could probably start right in that spot, right here. That's where it really starts getting going. And so if we're talking kind of tasking, I think we're on the right track somewhat with the sounds. That melody is fantastic. Do, 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 do. Fantastic instrument choice as well. It feels a little minery for tasking. This sounds like tonic. And so throughout here, it's a little start and stoppy. I don't think I would have pulled this energy back. We actually want to push energy forward. And it's kind of like every phrase, we want to build energy of the cue, usually adding layers, adding density into the layers that we already have. And until we reach somewhere around the halfway point of the cue. So if it's a 2-minute cue or so, somewhere around the minute mark. And so by this point in the cue, I feel like we have too many kind of new things happening. We've got this first section, which sounds like this. And then we have, well, I'm going to let that keep cooking here. All right, so we've got this first section. It has really cool kind of glass bowl type vibe going on. And then we change that up. We've pulled energy back. We add the melody, which I think works really, really well. But we've actually kind of gone down in energy level here, and we want to be pushing energy forward. And here we've gone again somewhere new. So I call this an embarrassment of riches, with so many really cool ideas all cooking along. But the end result is it creates somewhat of a disjointed structure where an editor using it underneath their storytelling, it would become distracting, because we want the music to support the emotion, yes, but it also needs to sit in the background. And having things change up too often will create distraction points. And not to mention this texture, I think it's cool. I like it. It works. It's a little low heavy in the mix, kind of around 200 hertz, 100 hertz. It's a little kind of boomy there in the strings, but this is a whole different texture that we've not heard before. And if we're going into this type of a texture, this type of instrumentation, probably want to work it in somehow earlier into the cue, hint at it. It's such a prominent idea, such a prominent sound. It just sounds really removed from where that was, and even more further removed from what that was. So it feels like as we're cooking along, we've got kind of this A, this B, and this C, and we keep going new places. Also, make sure that your phrases are relatively. See, this melody works really, really well with your chord progression. Boom, 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 boom. Maybe the bass line or something imply to that harmonic progression there. Right, so we have the drums plus the melody, then we have just the string section, and then we brought them together. So I commend you. I see the logic behind it. I think we just need to smooth it out so it doesn't feel quite so different. And then here at the end, we're introducing some pretty new sounds like that synth wavy type of Vangelis-y synth kind of vibe up top. Boom, boom, that arpeggio. I like it, but it's a brand new type of sound that we've not heard before. And generally, my rule of thumb is not to introduce any new characters to our story in the third act, especially if they're going to become kind of standout characters. So be careful. Also, our mix is getting loud. I think we need to make sure that we're not going above, if we're looking at LUFS, minus 14, minus 12 or so. We're okay in the LUFS department, but RMS is getting away from us a little bit. And we want to make sure that we set our, if I were to pull this over a little bit more so you could see it, we're clipping the output bus just a little bit here. So we would want to be careful on that as well. But otherwise, I think we're doing really, really good here. I think this is really working and I enjoy it. And I think we're onto something here. Let me hide that. And then the last thing I'll say is we need to make sure that we are ending our downbeat on a button which ends on tonic. Bum. You want to stick that one chord. Yeah, you got to kind of let them know when to clap. So make sure that you're ending on that one chord. But like I said, I really, really appreciate you putting yourself out there, putting your cues up. You're absolutely taking advantage of the community, putting your things up there, getting feedback, coming to the workshop, asking questions, and please continue asking those questions. Really, really do appreciate it. And thank you so much for your support and for sending your cues along. Like I mentioned, Gun-Britt sent this along during our week 7 search, and we are currently gathering cues for our week 8 search. So if you want to join us, why don't you head over to 52cues.com and join. It's free. And we also have other subscriber resources, as I mentioned. And if you found that feedback helpful and you want feedback for your own cues, separate from the podcast, but to get your own high-def feedback and critique video, then head over to 52cues.com/coaching, and you can order your own feedback video where I unpack everything, go even deeper than I did here, look at form, structure, harmony, melody, instrumentation, title, mix, EQ, mastering, all of those things. Head over to 52cues.com/coaching. And while you're there, you can also check out my one-on-one coaching sessions and sign up to be notified when the spring mastermind opens for registration. That will be coming around the first week of April. So that's going to do it for me this week. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it helpful. You definitely want to tune in next week where I will be talking about the 4 stages of competence. How do we go from not knowing what we don't know to knowing something so deeply that we don't have to think about it anymore? Spoiler, it's kind of a journey, and we kind of exist on all levels and not all planes. But we're going to be talking about the 4 stages of competence along with the Johari window on next week's episode. But once again, that's going to do it for me. Thank you again for joining me. And thanks again to the family, friends, and patrons of 52Qs who help keep all the lights on. Thank you so much. Just know that I love and appreciate every one of you. So I hope you had a fantastic week 7, and I hope your week 8 is going great. And I know, and I trust and believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52Qs podcast is copyright 2023 at 18 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52cues.com.